Hey, what is up YouTube? Just wanted to do a quick update on my new build, and if you've been following the stream, I essentially am playing currently the Siege Cascade Gemling Legionnaire. As you know, I was trying to make a 1 blast man build with plasma blast, but certain aspects of gem scaling did not work out. They do not contribute to the gem levels, not giving me the damage, and as such we have pivoted to this build. So I didn't innovate on this build. It's something that I saw on Reddit. I think there was a Chronomancer playing this build, and then a second video that I saw while trying to research by Michael M showcasing this interaction, so I did not create this. But I've taken this build concept, build idea, and tried to adapt it to my own, and here is my iteration of the Siege Cascade Gemling Legionnaire. I do want to caveat that this lightning variant of the build is in no way a league starter build. There is some form of investment when it comes to pulling this character together, so it is not a cheap league start character. I just want to put it out there. So the two key interactions, just to start off, let me just show you a Xesht 4 fight I recorded right before recording this video, and let me just show you how this works. And that is going to be Divine Arrows with the Siege Cascade. This build completely obliterates your frame rate on the single target, and you can see that we're able to take down the boss in a short amount of time. So in pretty much in about 10 seconds of raw time, which is closer to probably 5-6 seconds if there wasn't the frame rate drops and the latency and everything, we're able to take down the Xesht 4 with this build. So essentially, what is happening and how are we able to achieve this? So the key interaction is going to be the Siege Cascade interacting with Divine Arrows, as you saw earlier, pre-casting Divine Arrows, and then shooting the Siege Cascade allows us to be able to do that. So let me just roll over here, and then shooting the Siege Cascade targets the Divine Arrows. If you don't have Divine Arrows on the ground, essentially the Siege Cascade just blasts a single time on the monster in an area around it. With Divine Arrows, this allows us to be able to target and apply the multiple hits on the single target, allowing us to shotgun, and that is the key to the interaction. Apart from Divine Arrow, I believe Frostwall is another interaction that works as well. So if we're able to take out our cast and ignite setup, and I'll show you on the Frostwall, we will be able to cast the Frostwall and target it as well, allowing us to do more damage. And I'll get to the gems in just a second, but that is the additional interaction that we have over here. So I guess the quick question on everyone's mind, given that I'm releasing this build video before the kind of manifesto that GG will release in 1 to 2 days, personally I don't think this is on GGG's top priority to be nerfed. It is in no way overpowering, and it's kind of in line with GGG's multiple skill interactions to do damage. Like shockburst, you have to apply shock and then do damage, and for Siege Cascade to be able to apply Divine Arrows and then do damage. On top of that, there's a downside with the Divine Arrow Siege Cascade combination, which is if the units are very mobile, they move a lot, it is very bad because you will not be able to hit the mob because you are kind of laying down the foundations to do the damage, and if they move out of it, you no longer do any damage. So in my opinion, very ethical, very balanced. And the Siege Cascade is, in my opinion, not stronger than the shockburst rounds at the extreme endgame, but is a nice alternative if you're bored of shockburst rounds and you want to try out something new. And it does have the downside, like I mentioned earlier, which is the AoE. If they move out of it, you no longer do damage. So it's very, very good for pinnacle bosses, pre-setting up on map bosses and things like that. You just lay the foundations and just destroy it within a short amount of time. But if they're very mobile targets, it is not as good because shockburst can just apply the shock, and if the target's moving, you can still deal damage. So it is a very good alternative and potentially a cheaper option to get going. Another thing that's very interesting about this build is the area of effect scaling, and that is area of effect applies to the Siege Cascade not only on the bolt explosion radius, but also the targeting of enemies in a radius. So what does this mean? If I have Divine Arrows in a specific amount of radius and I want to target them, having increased area of effect allows us to increase the range at which Siege Cascade lays down the damage. However, for mapping, we're still not going to be using this, but the area of effect that we are going to be relying on is going to be on the bolt explosion radius. So you can see that if I were to shoot the Divine Arrows over here and I were to target them, wrong ammunition, they have an explosion around each of the vine arrows, and that's why we're using magnified effect, allowing us to have greater amounts of overlaps on the bosses. So you can see that once we apply the pods, the vine arrows don't stack up on top of each other. Each of them kind of like takes a pixel, a spot. So once you do spam, it does create a huge circle, and the outer rims, the AoE of the Siege Cascade, will not reach the boss if you don't have enough area of effect. And I'll be talking about how we're going to scale this aspect of the build. So hopping in, first is going to be the gems. So we are using, as our main setup, Blink to be able to traverse, and Herald of Thunder as our auras. So Blink allowing us to move quicker through the maps. And you can see that we're not using Temporalis, but if you do have that, you can use that as an option to be able to map a lot quicker. For Herald of Thunder, we are linking it to Neural Overload, Long Shot, as well as Electrocute. Let me just switch my gems back from the bossing setup. And Blink, we are linking it to Ingenuity with Arcane Tempo to cool down faster and blink faster. Next is going to be our auras that we switch to when it comes to the bossing setup. So what I'll do is I'll turn off Blink and Herald of Thunder and go into Cast on Ignite and Overwhelming Presence, and this is for the bossing setup. But just going through the gems really quickly, we are using Voltaic Mark, Frostwall, Spell Cascade, Ball Lightning, and Inspiration. So how does this all interact? With enough Fizz on your crossbow, Siege Cascade is going to be a Fizz to fire conversion spell, attack, and this allows you to convert the physical damage from your crossbow into fire damage, allowing us to be able to do fire damage. And as such, if you have some form of ability to deal some ailment damage, we will be able to apply Ignites and trigger all of these things in the Cast and Ignite. So we are triggering Voltaic Mark for increased effect of shocks, Frostwall to allow us to target, as I explained earlier, Spell Cascade to create multiple Frost Walls when it triggers. On top of that, we have Ball Lightning that shoots out as well to help us apply some form of shock, and Inspiration to reduce the mana cost. When we are spamming and Cast on Ignite is triggering, it does hemorrhage the mana quite a bit, so the Inspiration here will help us with that. If in the future, if you're able to stack a lot more mana, you can take out Inspiration and put in Impetus, which allows us to increase the rate at which we trigger all of these skills within our Cast and Ignite. For Overwhelming Presence, we're using it for bossing to allow us to reduce the ailment threshold of the bosses and allow us to be able to apply the ignites, the shocks a lot easier with this aura. Siege Cascade. So for mapping, we're just using it on a 5-link generally, but for bossing, that is where we put in Electrocute to allow us to immobilize the enemies better. Currently, we're linking it to Primal Armaments, Close Combat, Magnified, and Lightning Infusion. Generally, in mapping, I hardly even use this. It's only on tanky bosses or tanky rares that I use this on. Apart from that, even some of the rares in breaches, like Herald of Thunder, just carries really hard, and you can just use your Galvanic Shards to clear them. For Galvanic Shards, this is going to be our main clear skill in our maps. We're going to link it to Conduction, Acceleration, Innervate, Fork, as well as Martial Tempo. And then for bossing, we move our Martial Tempo to our Vine Arrow. So Vine Arrow is currently linked to our setup skill. Vine Arrow is linked to Persistence to allow it to last longer, Concentrated Effect to have a smaller spread when it comes to applying the vines, allowing us to shotgun a lot better. Link to Scattershot to shoot 3 vines at a time instead of 1, and then Fawn of Rage to allow us to gain rage, as you can see, as the Vine Arrow remains on the ground, giving us more damage while we have that up. Next is going to be Conductivity, linked to Heightened Curse and Curse Ground. So the name of the game is to not cast skills when the boss is up. You want to be fully immersing your time into casting Siege Cascade, as you have already laid down the foundations for Vine Arrow, and you don't want to be casting anything, and that's why we have the Cast and Ignite setup. And while that's happening, it will trigger all of these skills within Cast and Ignite, and then why we use Curse Ground is before the boss spawns, we lay down the Curse Ground so we don't cast it when the boss is up, and it'll create a ground where the boss is under that applies to reduce elemental resistances to the boss. So that is why we don't have it as manual cast, and we don't have it as in the trigger setup. Also because it's very expensive and we have no more slots to trigger Conductivity. So that is why Conductivity is not in there, because we can prelay and focus our time to only cast Siege Cascade, as you saw in the intro clip that I showed on the Xesht 4 kill. Last but not least, one of our defensive layers, we're going to be using Wind Dancer, linked to Unbreakable and Clarity to allow us to get a little bit more mana regen. Alright, jumping into our gear. Currently, we are using a crossbow with physical damage. I do advise getting a crossbow with physical damage to be able to trigger Cast and Ignite, because one of the downsides of being able to electrocute the bosses is the inability to be able to do shock, and as such we are not able to trigger the skills using cast and shock, and that is why we're opting for cast and ignite as the alternative. And to be able to do enough fire damage, we'll need a fist crossbow to allow us to do fire damage to ignite and trigger these skills. Alternatively, you could use pure lightning and just completely ditch cast and ignite, and the build will just do less damage but work exactly the same. So that's also an alternative if you can't afford an expensive fist crossbow. Somewhere around the range of 600 DPS is going to be where you want to aim for. For our helmet, it's going to be the classic evasion helmet with evasion boots, and on our helmet we want mana, evasion, attributes, dex and in, as well as resistances if you can fit that in. Currently, we are using Takati to give us chaos resistances, but eventually I am aiming for a CI setup, so that is where I may be dropping the chaos runes, and hopefully GG in the latest patch will allow us to do that, and so I don't need to buy a new set of gear for this. So that is something that I'm aiming for in the future, but we are aiming for evasion as our mitigation layer, as you'll see throughout the gear sets. Next is going to be our amulet, giving us attributes and 30 spirit, which is very important to allow us to reserve blink, which is 60 spirit. Herald of Thunder is 30 spirit for a total of 90, as well as Wind Dancer at 30, bring us to 120 plus clarity 10. So what you will be aiming for is going to be at least a 30 spirit amulet for us to be able to reserve all the auras. And for our bossing setup, we drop blink, which is 60, Herald of Thunder, which is 30, and reserve cast and ignite, which is 60, overwhelming presence, which is 30. So that is kind of the auras that we are using for the build currently. Apart from that, having the percent evasion is good to have, but not mandatory, and we'll be aiming for mana, attributes, resistances on this build. Something that I want to point out is that from the build construction, allowing us to be able to rely on mana for our in-stacking Gemling, giving us not a need to be able to purchase expensive gear that has life on it. And here's some examples of the gears that I purchased for this build. 5 exalts for boots, the very similar boots that I was going to use. I actually bought this boots, but I didn't use it because I went for like a 1520 MS boots. This is the amulet that I bought from trade, which was 5 exalts, and the breach ring over here, which I'm going to show in just a bit, at 50 exalts. So extremely cheap, and you should be able to find very good deals because we are not relying on the popular defensive mechanics like ES or life to be able to scale our EHP. And we're using mana for our build, and paired with certain attributes which are not the most popular attributes. You can opt for strength as an alternative instead of in and dex, which everyone is going for the build. Next is going to be a ring. This is a ring that I'm using for my previous build that has life on it, but ideally I do want mana over here, mana, double attributes, resistances, and the other ring has lightning damage, evasion, mana, dex, and this was a ring that I showed earlier that I purchased for cheap. Next is going to be the chest piece that is going to be Moria, and this Moria is going to be of attributes and mana. In my opinion, this is going to be the best combination, but other alternatives that you can opt for is going to be spirit, mana, spirit, attributes, and that will take the pressure off of the amulet, where you can get the spirit in there, and then you can get life as the alternative if you want. Currently, I am finding a little bit hard to resistance cap, and I'm using the all resist, and eventually I am going to be aiming for CI, so that is why I currently have all resist in here to be able to shore up that resistances. Next is going to be a Hoa, so it's just an additional socket Hoa, putting in Takati. I reused it from my previous build. Same for the Ingenuity, which is the standard scaling mechanisms for attribute builds. I used that for my previous build as well. And lastly, it's going to be the boots. That is 20 MS, mana, evasion, dex, resist, rarity, just to fill up the resistances and get bonus attributes for the build. So nothing too crazy there. The flask is something that I hardly ever use at all in the overall time that I'm mapping. I'm using a gold charm, but you can opt for stun or freeze in the build depending on what you want. And this is going to be the last item, and that is going to be the melting maelstrom. So this is an item that allows us to be able to completely restore our mana when it's empty, bringing us from whatever mana that we're at to immediately to full. It does have a downside, but I hardly even feel it at all. But just by pressing the flask, I'm able to refill the mana to full immediately, and this is a crazy mana flask. You're able to hit it 7 times in a fight, bringing you from 0 to full, and an absolutely mandatory flask for a mana build. If you don't have this, you can still use the ultimate mana flask, but just keep in mind that we are using Mind Over Matter for this build. Next is I want to talk about, which is also important, and that's going to be the weapon swap, which we are using to be able to cast, to be able to shoot out the vine arrows. And that is using the Quill Rain, which has 100% increased attack speed. I put in some attack speed soul cores in here, Puipolato, to increase the attack speed even further, and then we're using an attack speed quiver. You just need attack speed on the implicit, attack speed on the explicit, and it should be good enough. And then from there, that's where we're able to shoot vine arrows very, very quickly to be able to kind of lay the foundations for the boss. And then we shoot our Cascade, which will aim at all the vine arrows if you're in the vicinity. So that is the gear sets that I wanted to talk about. So next is going to be the passive tree, and that is going to be for the Ascendancy, for the Gemling. The first thing that I went for is, that is going to be the most important, is going to be enhanced effectiveness for this build. If you're just leveling it, you can take whatever and then respec to this later. But essentially the core to this build is leveraging enhanced effectiveness, and that was the core of the defense and offense of the build for it in stacking Gemling. And that is going to be getting enough mana for the defenses that we're using for Mind Over Matter over here. To be able to stack that int to not just give you damage from your Hands of Wisdom action, but also give you mana from the intelligence that you get over here. So every point of intelligence gives 2 mana, and we are doubling the effectiveness, so every point of intelligence gives 4 mana instead. And stacking the intelligence on your build will not just give you flat lightning damage, but also that mana for the defense. And yeah, essentially that also contributes to pure power towards the top side of the tree that gives us 2% lightning for 10 int. So not going into too much detail on the tree, essentially pathing through the center over here as we are stacking to evasion. And a cool interaction that I'm not sure who came up with this interaction, using the large controlled metamorphosis, allowing us to be able to get Falcon Technique, Proficiency, and Maiming Strike alongside Escape Velocity with Unhindered, and in the radius of all these extremely powerful notables. It's a very good way to be able to reduce your pressure on your passives when pathing all the way to the top side, as you can see on the MoM Gemling, which is on the south side of the tree. On top of that, I'm taking Acceleration, which is really good, and something that that is very good on the deck stacking Gemling, and that's going to be Falcon Dive. Not only are you scaling your attack speed from Hands of Wisdom and Action on top of Falcon Technique, but the dex that you're getting is going to double the amount of accuracy you get. Instead of 5 accuracy, you're going to get 10 accuracy per dex, and we're stacking a lot of dex, and the accuracy will feed into the increased attack speed that you get from Falcon Dive. To be able to see how much accuracy that you're getting, you're able to open your skill and look at the main hand accuracy rating. Currently you can see that I have 10,000 accuracy, giving us a crap load of attack speed from Falcon Dive. Of course, on the lightning build, as our main damage type, lightning rod is going to be mandatory, and this is an efficient 2-pointer, giving us 21 lightning pen with 30% increased chance to shock. And this is something, one of the key interactions of the build, being able to apply ailments. So something that we're going to be using is going to be Castle Ignite, as you have known, and we are scaling into the ability to inflict ailments to allow us to inflict ignites a lot better, since our amount of fire damage is not a lot. So scaling the ability to ignite is going to be really good. If you have a low PDPS crossbow, I would recommend taking out Lightning Infusion and putting in a different damage link. You can put in something like Execute in there, where you do more damage when the boss is on low life, as an alternative to be able to do more fire damage. Currently, you can see that we do 450 to 1300 fire damage. Without Lightning Infusion, we will do a lot more fire damage, giving us a better chance at applying ignites. So that is something to keep in mind. So we're taking Advanced Munitions to have the increased chance to inflict ailments. On top of that, we're also taking Giant Slayer to allow us to inflict ailments on rare and unique enemies, and this gives us a very good way to be able to inflict ignites. And on top of that, because we're using Electrocute on bosses, what you want to keep in mind is that we are not able to shock, and because of that, we put in Ball Lightning into our Castle Ignite setup to allow us to trigger these Ball Lightnings to shock. So previously, before taking the Giant Slayer and Advanced Munitions, I did over 10 Breachstone runs with different setups, and this is the final one that I settled on that allows us to apply the ailments most effectively. So yeah, currently Ball Lightning is the method at which we are triggering the shocks, allowing us to do 25% more damage as we apply the shocks in there. So that's a good addition and a cheap way to be able to get damage on the build, triggering a lightning skill. And with these ability to apply inflict ailments better, allows us to apply that easier. Another thing that's really good in this area is that advanced munitions is also in the area of effect of Against the Darkness, giving us 1, 2, 3, 4 ability to get the 4% int and 4% dex across 4 notables. Do keep in mind that if you are not able to afford the int and dex percent, you can also go for percent dex or percent int with any of the other benefiting things like gain as fire, gain as lightning, as some of the alternatives that I can think of for the build. Something to keep in mind is that area of effect is very good for your first skill or for Siege Cascade on your main hand, but it is terrible for Vine Arrow because you want the Vine Arrows to be in as small of an area as possible, and that is why for our weapon swap passes we are using Authority on the weapon swap 1, which only applies to Siege Cascade, getting the increased area of effect, but not applying to the Vine Arrow. So the sources of increased area of effect you only want to apply to your Siege Cascade, and then for your second weapon swap, that is where we're taking multitasking to allow us to shoot down the Vine Arrows and for them to last longer. So for Vine Arrows, we're getting multitasking, and for our Siege Cascade, we're getting Authority. On top of that, for our Vine Arrow, we're also getting Prolonged Assault for increased skill effect duration. And for our Vine Arrow, I think we're having a 12 point something seconds duration on the Vine Arrow. Let me just check over here. Attack time is 0.13, impact radius is 0.5, and the duration is, I can't remember where this is. I think it should be somewhere here actually. 1.5 meters, attack time, plant duration 12.35 seconds. So essentially the maximum number of plants you can lay down, the number of Siege Cascades that hits an enemy is going to be 12.35 seconds multiplied by the amount of attacks that you can do per second. So that is going to be a lot of vines within the 12-second duration that you can lay down, and a testament to why the frame rate gets completely destroyed when you shoot against the number of vines, and it calculates the damage of each Siege Cascade landing on each of the many vines that is laid down on the boss. So essentially it's a 12.12, let's say 12 seconds multiplied by I don't know, 5 attacks per second. That's going to be 60 vines, so 60 Siege Cascades, essentially a 60,000 damage multiplier. 6,000 damage multiplier to your Siege Cascade damage. And that is the interaction between the vines and how we're setting up our passive tree. Lastly, what we're going to be using is a number of Grand Spectrums. So this is completely not mandatory. You can get it on your gear, but we're using some Grand Spectrums, 3 of these to be able to increase our resistances. But alternatively, you can get resistances on your gear. Currently, you can see that we get some dex here, some rarity, but those can be resistances instead. And currently, we are also using the Controlled Metamorphosis that has a penalty to your resist. If you get a better rolled one, you can technically opt out of Grand Spectrums. But I'm currently just putting it in because I'm lazy to set up my resistances. One last thing that I want to mention for the passive tree is our jewels, and that is going to be you need at least 1 jewel for mapping that has a recover mana on kill, allowing us to be able to recover our main defensive layer, our hit pool, while mapping, and this hardly will ever get hit at all, and if it does go down, you take a huge hit. Melting Maelstrom will cover you for that. And that is pretty much the main interactions for the skill tree. Not going to every single thing here, but what we're using. So I'll have the mobalytics guide in the video as well for this. So in summary, the offensive scaling for this build is a range of how hard you hit and how fast you attack and reload, alongside scaling quality of life mechanics like area of effect. And for our Siege Cascade, one of the key interactions here is going to be the quality, and that allows us to do more damage against immobilized enemies. Baseline of 50, alongside our quality that we're getting from Gemling, a total of 118% more damage against immobilized enemies. So how hard you hit is going to be scaling from your flat damage that you get from your build. The Fizz only adds to the fire component, which is a tiny portion of the build, and it's merely there to inflict ignites. And the core of the damage, the flat damage that you're doing, is coming from the in-scaling from Hoa, so to keep in mind. How fast you attack is scaling from all the different sources of attack speed that I talked about earlier, and the area of effect allows us to increase the amount of the range at which the Siege Cascade can target, and secondly also the area of effect in which it explodes in, which is the bolt explosion radius. And that is why we are using magnified effect alongside authority to be able to increase our area of effect for a larger overlap for our Siege Cascade damage. So the attribute distribution that I'm looking for, I'm not sure which is the optimal one, but a high amount of attack speed is going to be really good to be able to reduce the amount of time it takes to attack, but also reduce the time it takes to reload. And that's something that is a unique interaction that is not mentioned anywhere, that attack speed increases your reload time. So that's really nice. So I'm currently doing a 3:2 percentage in terms of allocation of my dex and int to have a balance between how fast you attack and how much damage you deal. And for the Font of Rage, we're also getting Rage for us to be able to do more single target damage on bosses. And for the defenses, we're scaling it through evasion, as I mentioned previously. Warrior gives evasion, some evasion on rings, helmet boots, and evasion scaling on the tree through various number of passives here, enhanced reflexes, escape velocity alongside blur to give us the evasion scaling, giving us 82% chance to evade, and MoM plus melting maelstrom and mana recover and kill, giving us that huge defensive layer when it comes to your health pool. So far, ever since entering maps, I only died once to an Ellie Pen map ever since I entered maps, and maybe once or twice to the breach boss as I was doing various different setups and trying those out. So for mapping, I'm essentially only using Galvanic Shot, just blasting through most of the monsters, and any rare monsters that come by, I throw like 3 or 4 Vine Arrows, switch to Siege Cascade, and just lay it on them. So that's pretty much the rotation. For bossing, what I'm going to be doing is using the switching up the gem setups and the auras over here, using Castle Ignite, Overwhelming Presence, switching Electrocute over to our Siege Cascade and Martial Temple to Vine Arrow to shoot faster, and that essentially is our bossing setup. So, and then when it comes to the bossing, laying down the Vine Arrows before the boss spawns, throw down a Conductivity, and then shoot your Siege Cascades. So that is the bossing rotation. For future upgrades, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be aiming for CI, but I do need a few more levels. I'm kind of aiming for CI alongside taking raw mana with EB potentially, if I scale ES a little bit better on my other gear pieces. So that is one option. And I may opt for also impetus in the setup if I'm able to sustain more mana. Once I increase my mana pool with all of these pathing, I may opt for impetus instead of inspiration for us to trigger Castle Ignite a lot quicker. And in the future, you could also opt for a 6-link Herald of Thunder. You could just link more gems into this to do more damage. So that essentially is the summary of the build. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you liked the video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll catch you in the next one.